Hello, friends. This is Joseph from HoS Sound. We started HoS Sound with one intention, which is to connect people in the music industry and help artists, promoters, label owners, Spotify curators, and other people who work in the music industry to spread their message and get known by an audience who is interested in that. And as a byproduct, we hope that some of these insights that we share in these chats will help and inspire other of us. Without further ado, enjoy today's guest. Sunil Sharpe is a well-known figure in the dance music scene, with hundreds of gigs from the early 2000s and all over the world under his belt. In addition to his relentless work to support techno, Sunil has been also supporting the nightlife of his country, Ireland, with the campaign Give Us the Night. This campaign aims to promote culture and nightlife by discussing the needs for night licenses and venues with the government. What makes Sunil an icon for many is not only his unique style, bunny only, fast-paced, and using the pitch control exclusively to change tempos, but also his relentless work in improving his skills, his loyalty to the grassroots of the scene, and the contribution to the latter. In the last decade, Sunil has in fact been doing interviews with other DJs, has been running his own label Earwiggle, and teaching DJing to young talents in Dublin. In this chat, which is more extensive than your usual chat on HoS Sound, we take the time to discover Sunil's origins, his inspirations, and his path. The conversation and his experience remind us that we should not expect everything to happen overnight, and how DJing is comparable to martial arts. There is no such a thing as perfection, and there is always room for improvement. Without further ado, enjoy this chat with Sunil Sharpe. Hey Sunil, thanks for being with us. So we were saying before, you're teaching production and DJing, right?
Yeah. It's actually mostly DJing really. It's a music production. There's music production on the course as well, but within my class that I have with them, I don't really show them music production. There's not enough time for that. I used to teach a little bit more time on the course, and at that point I was able to show them music production stuff. I was always kind of just showing them in kind of in my own time sounds wrong. I wasn't teaching them as part of the module that they had. Yeah. But I was able to show them some stuff in addition to what they were learning with the teacher who actually taught them about music production, if that makes sense. But yeah, because all of us are music makers on the course, I mean, who are teaching, I guess it's good that we can all share a bit of our knowledge. So yeah.
Indeed, and I'm sure like people were appreciating a lot, like especially when it comes from people who have produced and put out tracks. For them, it's super important.
Yeah. No, I think so, and I think on our course too, there's a lot of a lot of the class now are into techno. It's like a few years back, or even a bit longer, when they come onto the course, some of them would tend to gravitate towards techno, others wouldn't. But the last few years, literally everybody in the class is a techno head. I used to feel kind of slightly guilty that I was turning them on to techno, and I felt like, oh no, I don't know, I felt a bit of responsibility here, because I felt I was taking them away, luring them away from what they really loved, because some of them would come onto the course being really into trance or something like that. And I know it's a bit of a crossover between the two, especially nowadays, but sometimes it seemed like two opposite ends of the spectrum in certain ways, because a lot of the let's say the post-2000s trance scene versus the post-2000s techno scene were quite different actually. And some of the people would be coming on knowing everything about trance, knowing everything about their favorite producer, all of this, and then within a few weeks or a couple of months they were playing techno. And I used to find this by the end of the year sometimes. It wasn't that I'd be disappointed in that, but in certain ways I would be like, well, your roots are kind of in trance, and you're totally disregarding that. I mean, you love this music, you love trance, but now you're getting totally into techno. I mean, you're an authority on trance, but now you're not going to ever play it again, it seems, or you're not as into it anymore. So for a while, I was kind of thinking, I know a lot of the time it's kind of easy to go with the crowd, and forget about maybe what you used to be into. But who am I to listen? We all find new music or styles or producers or whatever it might be that overnight or instantly can change your whole perception of music or dance music. So I guess that's what happens with a lot of people when they hear techno. Maybe the immediacy of the sound sometimes. But I think now the way it's gone in the class, that the vast majority are already coming in listening to techno. So yeah, that's just where it's at the moment, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, and totally and eventually, if someone chooses to, let's say, convert to techno, it's probably because they like it. So in a way, you're just showing them something else.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I just don't like to think that they forget about what they were into prior to that as well. That they'll always have room for that as well, because I think it's I don't know. It's good. It's good to not forget your roots either. So yeah.
Yeah, and perhaps, I mean, like, I guess, like, some producers manage to take the roots into what they lend to, right? Basically, they might decide to do techno, and then they have roots in trance, and then they can be like a beautiful thing, because then it kind of creates a new style, or creates their own music voice, which is beautiful.
Yeah, definitely, because I think techno in general has been probably lacking, or has been known to sometimes lack a little bit of melody, let's say. Certainly not the original wave of techno or other little parts or factions within techno over the years. But one thing it has been accused of over the years is that it's not the most melodious or melodic music. But I think sometimes trance can sort of bring, or trancey elements can sort of kind of bring that into the sound, which is beneficial, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's a matter of taste. Like, there are some people who love it. There are some people who just can't stand it because it's like too melodic for them. And I get both. I mean, it's
it can be anything. It can be anything. It can stretch lots of different ways. I think that's the beauty of techno, is that it's is the vast range of styles and sounds that we still haven't heard yet. And that was the beauty of techno. One of the factors that kept me with it, actually, in the early days, or made me very curious about it, was reading certain writers, reading about their passion for it, actually, because I think a lot in the when I was finding out about techno in the first place, the internet wasn't the internet existed, but it wasn't really being used in the way that it is now. I mean, I think it would have been more just the ultra nerds that used the internet back then, or knew about it. But for me, and there was no publications really publishing reviews or whatnot online. So for me, and for nearly everybody, we found out about it through magazines, or purely from going into town, into shops, and speaking to people there, and picking up music that way. But there was a few writers, at least, whose reviews and words really changed my perception of techno and electronic music. And a lot of the time, you were reading descriptions without hearing the music, So, but because it was, a lot of it was because of the direction that the magazines, the editorial, and some of those writers were taking, in that they were having an experimental techno section, or they had something that was purely for US techno. They were referring to the different sounds within the UK, or whatever it might have been. I mean, so many different sounds and scenes apparently in operation back then. And it was, I think that sort of that mystique around it, like all of these names, and then eventually hearing the music, but not knowing much more. It left a lot more to the imagination, but it also made you feel that there was many different parts of this sort of sprouting up around the world. And I guess that still is the case, but it did make me realize from an early point that techno was just, it's kind of in the eye of the beholder, and what they want to make of it then, And I think just having one sound, or a couple of sounds, and only viewing techno through that prism or through that lens. It doesn't have to be that way. There's so many different styles and sounds, and that's what makes it unique against other forms of electronic music. I don't really feel there is another form of music that spawns so many other subgenres as techno does, and that's what makes it something that you can always come back to. If it's got too hard or too fast, pull back a little bit and find something else. But ultimately, it's about, I guess, if you're a producer as well, is making your own sound. Whatever type of music it is. But I think in techno particularly, it can be, I don't want to say easier, but there's maybe more options and more ways to make and sculpt your own type of music.
Totally, and I think sometimes I come to think that the simplicity of techno, like it's not like it makes it more. It makes it easier for people to interpret, and it makes it easier for other people to reinterpret and blend with other genres, which is a beautiful thing, because in a way, like, kind of brings people together, brings people and cultures on the same page.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think there's I think as well, because it's got so many years behind it as well. There's like what people would argue as well. The techno could have started before the first wave of Detroit. They're certainly the ones who put the name on it. But you go back further, and other types of experimental forms of electronic music in a similar ballpark. I mean, it's going on years, but even going back to then, I mean, the fact that you can play an old Detroit techno track alongside something new. I know, like, production styles may vary in that, but it doesn't really matter a lot of the time. You drop certain old tracks going back to the 80s or whatever, and they can have an even better impact or get a better reaction than tracks of today. So I think one thing that's changed a lot, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, is the power aspect of techno. I'm not sure that it's always a good thing. It is in certain ways, but I think I think a lot of it's gone hand in hand with sound systems and with people and the crowds, particularly, not just the techie heads or the producers or even the promoters. It's actually the people on the ground, the people going out, who are very, maybe not as much the last couple of years, but I do seem to remember a point where everybody in the crowd was all of a sudden a sound engineer or knew everything about Function One sound systems. And they'd be asking, "Oh, is it a Function One?" Or, "Oh no, it's a Void." "Oh yeah, it's a Void." "Oh yeah, they're great." And all of a sudden everyone had a and it's no bad thing, but certainly, everyone in the crowd all of a sudden was particularly interested in that side of things, or who paid a lot of heed to how big the sound system was, or what the spec was, and I think that was definitely good for a while, because you found that a lot of promoters and that were putting the extra money into sound, or were speaking to clubs to make sure that the sound was of a certain
standard,
quality and standards. Yeah, but I think, I don't know, I think what I found in the last number of years is that it's got, techno in general has got too occupied and too focused on the power of the kick drum, and I think it's kind of worn a little bit thin now, actually. I think it's sort of, I think overall it's starting to outpunch itself in certain ways, to become all about power, and not enough in between that and the rest of the elements in the tracks. It's not to say that there's not some really good, powerful, strong techno tracks. There's more than enough. I think that's, I guess what I'm trying to say is, it's not that there's not good music being made, and there's not a glut of that stuff coming out. But I feel, because a lot of sound systems are tuned and are so big, and they're sort of primed to playing the heaviest, most powerful music, which is fine, but I feel there's something's getting lost in the mix, though. We're not it's kind of all about power, and I don't know. Again, it comes back to that kick drum thing. I think people like Truss and the MPIA3 thing. I think that was the beginning of a new stage when techno was getting a little bit harder, and where it was taking elements of hardcore techno. Now it's kind of run with that. And don't get me wrong, I love all the old Thunderdome stuff. I love old Dutch and German hardcore, the New York stuff. I love all that. I'll still play it in sets. But I feel now what we have is a kind of a hybrid, which is fine, but it's all very much coloured by distorted kick drums. And I just come away from nights, some of those kind of nights where I've just heard that sound all night in that room. And it reminds me of a time when this happened before, when techno became very, very kind of one-dimensional. And it was essentially when it started to get quite commercial as well. And I feel we've sort of reached that point, actually. I feel we're at a tipping point now. And I definitely don't want what happened then and what tends to happen in these situations, that the whole thing collapses. But I think we're sort of at that tipping point now where it could disintegrate. And I think we just all have a little bit of a duty to represent us as best we can, and particularly organisers as well. Curation is something that's talked a lot about, and some organisers are fantastic at that. But at the same time, there's a lot of other organisers who will literally just be followers, and they might only have a more narrow range of stuff that they're into, and then programming and music style. It can tend to just be, I don't know, just from one extreme, and then not leaving that extreme, and to me it's a bit boring. I'm left a bit cold by that, I've got to say, and I hope it can. I hope something can open up a little bit within the techno scene in the coming few years, where we can celebrate many styles within the same night, because all those styles still exist. They're still getting made. The records are still coming out, but I'm seeing an awful lot of stuff being made that I'm not really hearing out in clubs so much. I'm just hearing kind of one narrow range, and I think we can do better than that, basically.
Yeah, totally. I totally get it. And it's tricky, because I think what you were saying, that this thing happened, there was a point probably in history when this thing happened, and I think history repeats itself, and but it's very hard for people who are in the cycle to realize that there's going to be a tipping point. I think as human, we tend to think that, okay, there's a trend of harder and harder music. We think this is going to last forever. But if you really think about it, it's much more likely that, as you say, like, it's going to reach a tipping point because people are going to get sick of that sound, and it's probably going to revert to something completely different.
And that's kind of what you don't necessarily, what you don't want happening is what happens with the whole minimal thing. And we went from very hard kind of stuff like the Shran stuff and the DJ and Muck thing and all of that. And I mean, another thing as well, people might want to remind themselves is from back then, that's exactly where we're kind of at now. And then the whole scene imploded, So I don't think that's going to happen exactly. It's not going to, I mean, there was a huge, there was definitely a very, I don't know, like I feel what happens with minimal and the whole Richie Houghton thing, that's kind of that found its place over time anyway. I mean, that's essentially the whole tech house thing and what Houghton does now as well. So I mean, that has its place, So everything has its own place, but there is the danger that techno in general could become less popular. Certainly in the harder terrain, that sound could punch itself out, and I think it's starting to reach those points now as well. I mean, I think though the beauty of this sometimes though is the fact you can go back to all those old records and play them now. So there was a glut of that stuff being made back then in 2003, 2004, 2005, even later. But then it just sort of fell off a cliff very, very quickly, and the better techno sounds and some of the harder stuff tended to disappear for a while everybody tried to make more lower BPM stuff and stuff that was essentially like kind of digital house, really.
Yeah.
Is the best sort of term I'd have for it. So there was a there was a time where it did literally just fall off a cliff, and I just think we have to be careful with that it doesn't that it's not all just sort of marching music, you know. It has to be dance music as well, you know. And I think that's maybe an accusation that could rightfully have been thrown at techno in the past, or certainly in the harder scene, is that there wasn't much room there to dance to it. I think one of the ways that it sort of, the harder sounds got away with that in the early 2000s. Well, first of all, it wasn't as distorted. It was heavy, and some of it was overdriven and stuff, and it was fast. But a lot of it was using a lot of loops and stuff as well. So it sort of had a natural groove or rhythm to it as well. And I think that could have been a little bit of a part of it then, and certainly with the tribal sound and all the rest. But as it became just sort of harder and kind of relied a lot more on distortion, I think that's when it started to fade and disintegrate. In saying that, some of the production on a lot of modern techno now that is distorted, it's head and shoulders above the stuff from back then. Yeah. So I mean, so there is a difference, you know, but there was a lot of kind of cheap computer distortion being used on a lot of techno back then. Whereas now a lot of it's going through, you know, a lot of both through techniques, technology, hardware. I think overall a lot of distorted, fast, hard techno, for want of a better description. It's a lot better these days. So I guess that's one difference anyway.
Yeah. I mean, yes, and also I think that there's much more output now, so things go faster. And I guess, and my hope is that people will also experiment more. So we'll not just take things for granted and trying to imitate them, but also even like when they get into a genre and it's very distorted, like they might just try to do variations of that might spur new genres, new styles, new subgenres, which I think is going to be very interesting.
Yeah, definitely, and I think it's. I mean, ultimately, a lot of the time, it's about a crew or a collective, pushing something, you know, and a lot of the time, it can only take a couple of producers to flip the script and just come up with something new. So it's always, I mean, there's always something waiting around the corner with this, you know. It just depends what decisions people make, you know. A lot of the cases, you know, and I think. Clubbing, for want of a better term, is going to change in the next 6 to 12 months. It may come back to more local, community-based nights. Not that they've disappeared, but they've certainly been under greater threat in the last few years as the scene has become a little bit more commercialized. So it'll be interesting when we kind of go back to basics a little bit more. What can sprout out of that, because that's usually where the really cool, interesting stuff pops out of. So
yeah, indeed. And now you mentioned a bit the new situation. Like now we have essentially half of the world in lockdown, which also means for the entertainment industry, for events, for techno, it's like we basically wiped out or froze the scene from one day to another. And what do you think is going to be the new normal for people who want to go to clubs, or the other side for people who DJ and produce music?
Well, I think it's all going to come back. It's going to come back to where it was, no doubt. It's just a matter of when exactly that will be. It sort of depends if you're a punter, if you're going out to enjoy yourself at the weekend and you're not involved from a DJ or production point of view, or you know, you're not involved with the actual night, then I think the experience of going out that same experience will probably come back. The only thing though that could change is, will all the venues still be there? Will all the big events still be there? Will there be as many festivals next year? So that's one thing to maybe bear in mind. What could happen as well is, one thing that's happened in recent years is there has been more collaboration between promoters, a kind of a a strength by numbers kind of operation that has brought promoters together. So rather than being local rivals, they've come together to put on bigger events in their area, and so that it's all a win-win kind of situation, rather than trying to go against each other and losing money. I know we've seen it happen here in Dublin, and I've definitely seen it happen with promoters abroad as well. I just wonder, might that change a little bit? It could get to a point soon where some people will say, oh, well, there's not enough money in this, me to keep this going now. I'm out for now. And then others then may not come to agreements on what they want to put on, or someone might go, well, I'll just do that myself. So we could have a splinter. We could go back to a little bit more of a splintered scene again. That could happen if it goes back to more local events where there's not as much to be made, let's say. So that could create a new dynamic in the scene, actually. So yeah, it's kind of interested where some of that might go. It could be for the good of the scene though too, because it means that some, rather than purely being bookers, which is what a lot of promoters have become, some may go back to booking people that they're really, really into themselves, rather than what the stats tell them online. And that could be interesting if it goes back to smaller venues, maybe run by one promoter. So that's one aspect. So what could happen is I think, listen, a lot of the same type of events will go on, but I think for me the interesting stuff is more grassroots stuff a lot of the time, and what comes up from the smaller nights. So what I'd love to see happen is more producers or lesser known DJs, for instance, who don't have a name, who are not known, who are on the way up or should be on the way up. Maybe more of those acts getting to play, or that there's just a little bit more of a spread, rather than this superstar DJ sort of scenario that's kind of infected the scene again. I think there's an awful lot of people. There's an awful lot of records, for instance. I'd love it to go back to the kind of idea, not that it always happened, but it definitely did happen at one point, where as a promoter / DJ, and I mean, I've thought of it myself. I mean, I've ran nights on and off over the years, and I've thought that, if I did start running a night again, it would be the angle I'd like to go, is where I literally just pick up a record. Don't know who the person is, don't know where they're from. It's just an email address or a fax number like the old days, and or a telephone number or whatever. And you just contact that person and say, listen, I'd love you to play at the night. Are you up for it? And maybe start to reward the creators a little bit more. Yeah. I don't believe that the creators are being rewarded enough in music in general, but particularly in dance music. And I think we have a responsibility with that, is to reward the creators. If you're not rewarding the creators, the good creations are not going to be there, or there's certainly not going to be enough of them. So if we don't reward the people that are actually providing the content, making the records, whatever you want to call it, it's not and listen, don't get me wrong, there's loads of people that, I know plenty of promoters and label owners that are always supporting new talent and want to get new people out there, but unfortunately that isn't rewarded on a wider level as much as it should be. The scene has got so big, but it seems to be dominated by a very small group in a lot of ways. And a lot of what I think the danger is with that sometimes is that by not rewarding people that are putting in so much hard work, by not acknowledging them, by them maybe not getting booked,
they will stop.
They will stop, exactly, yeah. And it's happened a lot in the past. I mean, some of my favorite producers of all time stopped because of just not really getting the opportunities. Then again, being a DJ, getting out there, getting gigs, part of that is within your personality trait as well, and that's something that everyone has to develop. So sometimes you can't necessarily cry about that. That's the game. There is a game, for want of a better word, and you have to know that to some degree. You don't have to be out schmoozing with everyone and staying at every party till the end and getting to know everybody. I guess some people might go that route a little bit more in the early days when they're naturally going out. There's other DJs that just are always going to be partying all the time and are always going to be hanging out with the promoter, and are going to be everyone's friend, and that can work, and that's great. But the opposite of that is the studio boffin, or the person that just wants to stay in the studio all the time and doesn't go down to the club, even if it was across the road from them. There are those type of producers as well. I think somewhere in between is a happy medium, or a balance, and that doesn't even have to include going to the club, but it could mean keeping in contact with the people that run the events, or are being supportive in other ways as well. So I don't know. I think it pays a lot though to support and promoters and liaise with them and share ideas with them, and just be part of the community in some kind of way, because you can't really expect as a DJ for it all to just fall on your lap because you're making some tracks or whatever. There sometimes has to be a little bit more than that. Certainly in the early days, anyway, I think.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there is a lot to say about this. I think you're absolutely right. I think finding your in between is what works. I mean, eventually, as you said, like if you make music, it can be amazing music, but if no one listens to it, like it's pretty much impossible for anyone to discover your music, even if it's great. And one thing that it just came to mind is that I do believe that. So my fear is that, unfortunately, because of how the market works, even when we're going to go back to festivals, clubs, there's going to be so much, let's call them established DJs who have lost their gigs, who are going to have priority over the unknown or less known names. Because I think a lot of promoters, agents have already invested for part of the fee of the DJ. So they're just trying to move the gigs from these 6 months to the next 6 months.
Yeah. There is a bit of that. I mean, I think, and, you know, obviously it does need to be said too. A lot of DJs, myself included, I'm sure with yourself too, you know, we've lost an awful amount of gigs and as a result, money as well. So I can understand if there's a lot of promoters and agents wanting to reschedule things. But on the same hand, I think what we probably all have to remember as well is that once we get back playing again, we're playing again, we're out there, and things are sort of to some degree back to normal. But I think what we have to recognize is that for clubs and promoters, but particularly the clubs, they're not back to normal. It's going to take them a bit of time to actually recover, because first of all, customer confidence isn't there, or what would be the best? The numbers are not going to necessarily be there. You could be going from gigs that were easily doing 600 or 700 people, that all of a sudden could be just scraping 200 or 300 people. You know, so things could change very quickly. And I think fees, for instance, are going to have to change very quickly. And I think every DJ, every agent, a lot of them recognize that. But it's one thing saying you recognize that now, but when it comes back to us, and still playing hardball with clubs and promoters, I think it's something that all DJs should really try to get to grips with and get very proactive with, is that they, as a matter of course, bring down their fee, and that fees actually come down. Because I mean, they were getting ridiculous. They were getting into sort of almost football player territory there for a while, you know. And I think it's that certainly that's at the top end of it. But I think overall, if a certain amount of DJs are going to rinse it for all that they can, I mean, it's going to have a knock-on effect to everything else as well. We are meant to be a community, and I think as a community, we need to be responsible when this comes back in how much the ticket prices or door prices are when we come back to this. People are going to have less money. So if an event was costing 20 or 25 on the door, I mean, you should be looking that's going down to 15 or 20, or, you know what I mean? It should be coming down incrementally, but by a considerable amount, actually, if possible. I think one thing that was happening a lot in recent times as well was a lot of club events were starting to mimic our lineups, club lineups, were starting to mimic festival lineups as well, because they almost had to compete with them to some degree. Maybe that might have to change a little bit, you know. And I think punters might need to accept that, but might need to also accept that if they want to have a club scene in the future, they need to support it a little bit. So I think everybody from the DJs and agents, they need to accept that something is changing. And if they want to be part of a long-lasting scene, that they need to contribute. And by contributing, that means to drop their price and their fees. But similarly, I think clubs themselves as well are probably going to have no option but to maybe narrow the programming a little bit. And hopefully people that are going to events can be understanding of that. And that maybe we just naturally move away from the lineup focused headliner culture led scene that we've got into in recent times. I mean, some of this might sound a little bit hypocritical for me, seeing as I do DJ around the place, but I do believe in local smaller nights and nights that aren't all about the DJ and everybody facing the DJ, looking at if the DJ is looking back at them and smiling and all that kind of thing. I mean, I think it was starting to lose the plot there a little bit. I've no doubt that some of that will still remain. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with smiling at the crowd, but I feel that there's been this other sort of animal at play within the scene, definitely very much driven by the whole social media aspect of filming and basic, like, I mean, we're talking about live streaming and stuff. I mean, there was a lot of live streaming going on in clubs before this, where everyone's literally just filming it and putting it straight to Instagram or straight to wherever. I mean, there was a guy at a gig that I was at. I don't know if I was at it. I didn't play at it, but it was in Dublin there about a year or so ago, and he actually stood at the front of the stage filming the whole. He was live streaming the whole gig to his friends and to people on his page on Facebook. And I kind of just thought, God, that's really where we've got. I mean, I don't want to criticize him because he gets something from that, you know. And by the way it looked was he was actually an older guy. He wasn't younger. A lot of the time you always think that it's younger people that are filming, and that's kind of like currency, you know, with their friends or people they know, to put it straight up on Instagram or whatever. I mean, we all play a part in this. I mean, if somebody tags me in an Instagram story, I mean, sometimes I'm going to maybe repost that as well. So we all feed into that problem. But I think the way to nuke that a little bit is to just start having less filming in clubs. I know some clubs are already doing that. I think we need more of that. I think we actually need a lot more of that. And we also need that to be the message of why we're not filming, to be communicated by clubs. It's not literally just, no, you're not filming, and that's it. If people start to bring in that sort of condition or rule, they need to tell the crowd and people why they're doing that, you know. I think some do, but I think it might happen where people just do a no filming policy and that's it. I suppose it's probably apparent to a lot of people why they would be doing that. But I think that's something that needs to happen. But yeah, sorry, just to finish that slightly pointless story, but I'll do it anyway. But that particular guy, I mean, was probably in his 40s, I would say. And I was just thinking about it. Perhaps he's somebody whose friends aren't going out as much, you know. And this is actually a way for him who wouldn't have been at the gig. So his sort of everyday communication with people online, a lot of those people wouldn't be with him at the gig. So for him, he might have a different angle on it, in that he's sort of live streaming to all of his mates who believe that they're too old to be going out. So I can see that as well. But I just think in general, that might be one area where the club scene can kind of can really become reinvigorated again. Where I think clubbing culture, or the whole club atmosphere and vibe, I mean, it has become commodified. It has been taken over by brands like Boiler Room. And I say that as somebody who has benefited a lot from Boiler Room. So I'm not actually knocking them as such, but I feel the whole operation has become something probably a lot bigger than what they ever anticipated. And now it's got to a point really where it's, you know, clubbing or the rave experience or whatever. It's not something that you have to go and be there to experience. It's literally something you can view on your phone or go to on your remote control. You know, it's like another TV station. You know, and I'm not so sure that that's been a great development. Actually, I think there should be a separation. Actually, I think there should be a separation. Okay, big events or festivals, then yeah, live streaming. But when I think it starts going into the more underground stuff, smaller clubs or just standard club events at weekends and stuff, I think that's where you're crossing the line. To be honest, I think some of that needs to sort of stay there, you know, and make it about being there, because, you know, it could be getting transmitted to people on their screen. But I mean, if they prefer to watch it at home rather than actually go down the road to the event, I mean, that's another that's a downfall of it. I can understand why a lot of clubs will want to have certain and by the way, it's not only Boiler Room. I mean, there's many different platforms that are coming up, and then there's a lot of people that are running their own streams, and a lot of people have become a lot better at that now, and will have come a lot more experienced in that through this coronavirus pandemic. You know, a lot of DJs wouldn't have known how to set up a live stream before. Now they do. So there will be a lot of people and organizations and clubs that can actually set this stuff up themselves. I guess with Boiler Room, you're getting such a huge audience, and I think, don't get me wrong, I think it's really it's beneficial to any DJ that goes through there. It was very helpful to me in the past as well. But I think it's reached a little bit of a tipping point now. And I think if Boiler Room are wise, they might just look at this a little bit more and just, I don't know, maybe kind of examine how much good it's doing for the club scene versus how much damage it's doing to the club scene.
Yeah. And now, I mean, it's super interesting what you're saying. So for me, this is also... So 6 months ago, when we did the first HoS Sound with Jorge, the guy who runs Superstition, and Andy from Fabric, we were actually discussing about this problem of massive fees. Daniel Avery was there as well, and Bianca from Take Note. So we were discussing in this panel about the need for a reset in the industry, because of the problem that you just discussed about extremely ridiculous fees of headliners. They have to push up the fees for the rest of the lineup. They squeeze out all the small artists. And I think this is our occasion to actually call this a reset and work with completely new conditions. And in a way, like what you were saying, it's a community. We need to nurture the community. We need to allow people to get to the club, and we probably need to give space to smaller artists. This could be the occasion for the whole industry to actually reset and reestablish new rules. And there was another thing that just came to mind, like another idea that is, unfortunately, I think I've seen loads of streams from in the last weeks, because everybody's home, and there are independent music producers, artists who are doing their streams, and they have almost zero audience because everybody's putting streams out. It's very hard for them to get exposure. On the other side, you have Boiler Room and all the other big streaming or media platforms. They have a massive audience, but they are still streaming like the usually big DJs or established DJs. I think there might be an opportunity for, let's say, for the community to get together and say, I host my, call it virtual club night, where I'm picking up my smaller artist, and I invite my audience to listen to the smaller artists that probably people not necessarily have heard of.
Okay.
Yeah, you see what I mean? Like you host your virtual lineup, and then eventually, like someone who has an audience already, someone like you or someone like who is an international DJ can curate their own lineup.
Yeah.
On streaming, and people who attend can donate, or I don't know, the access is like £1 or £2, and then the money gets distributed to smaller artists as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I mean, I think any way to shine a light onto newer, or for want of a better term, smaller artists is a good thing. But I think what you're saying there then is that so people that might be organising their own their own lineup of events, let's say on a Friday or Saturday night as they're going ahead. So like there's 5 or 6 DJs or 7 or 8 DJs, that a few of those are relatively unknown acts then. Is that kind of what you mean? To sort of, so rather than it all being like a bunch of headliners together, that it's actually a few headliners but a few upcoming acts as well.
Exactly. In a way, like the way I'm seeing that is that now it's a moment where it is much easier, or let's say less expensive to put together a lineup. So you don't need to get a headliner necessarily to get 700 people to your club to pay the bills.
Yeah.
Now it's kind of free for you to host any type of virtual club night, and you can potentially. We are all more free to actually decide whoever we want in that lineup, because we don't need to pay 6K for a club, right?
That's a good point. I guess at the top level of streaming and stats and all of that, I guess some of the bigger platforms would still be very concerned with how many people are watching us and how that's getting transmitted to a certain person's fan base and all of that. But I think one of the other aspects of what you're saying as well, one of the other benefits, and it's a benefit for everybody. This is the thing. If you're only putting on big headliners and established names, they don't have as much pressure on them in terms of who they're playing with. The person you have to worry about, and let's face it as well, anyone who wants to be and who has got into the position there through being competitive as well, in whatever. Now there's competition of varying degrees. So some of that competition is literally just how many followers you have. But in terms of the competition of playing a good set and being the best DJ that you can be, I'm not so convinced that putting yourself or playing on lineups just with the established is actually particularly good for those people on that lineup. I think it's very healthy as a scene that we're playing on lineups with other upcoming artists and the potentially the future stars or the people of tomorrow and the people that are hungry. Because what kind of happens is people's hunger can tend to kind of level out the more established they become. And if they're playing with lots of the same type of artists, I'm not saying that people's the quality of their sets is going to deteriorate or reduce, but it mightn't continue to grow as much as it could. And I think by having that sort of healthy mixture or balance, it's actually it's good for everybody. I mean, the person you should always be keeping your eye on are the upcoming ones. And I mean, I think any established artist that wants to stay away from playing with those upcoming acts needs to ask themselves questions. I mean, I've heard in the past of certain DJs that would have fixed a lineup so that they didn't have to play directly after another act or directly before them, because it might make them not look as good, and that particular act would have been maybe not as big as them in the scene or whatever at the time. And I think if you're not willing to accept the challenge, or for want of a better word, the competition, you do need to be asking yourself some questions, And I think it's very healthy as a scene that we are always testing ourselves against other artists, but more so testing ourselves against ourselves, and we need to be getting better at our craft all the time, And if we feel that another act or other fresher, newer acts are going to maybe make us not look as good, I mean, I don't think that's a good thing at all. And I think that's why it's healthy to be always playing with newer acts, to be always playing back to back, or not back to back, playing after someone or before someone or whatever it might be, and to not fear that, to not fear that there could be somebody else coming along who has something a little bit different of their own. And again, it's not about being better, it's about being different and being as good as you possibly can be. But a lot of the time people just sort of equate a performance or a gig with whoever got the most online feedback afterwards, or whoever got the most hits for something or whatever it might be. But that's not what it's all about. That's not what people are particularly thinking about in the club at the time, is it? It's what's happening at the moment, and the response to a certain track or a certain mix or a certain part of the set. That's the stuff you take away with you, you know. And sometimes social media and all of that can tell a very different picture to what actually happens at an event sometimes too. So I think we have to be mindful of that, and what we can learn from gigs, gig by gig, and also not to be afraid of that competition, or for want of a better term, or to expand on that, friendly competition. Because I think sometimes competition can come across as a very kind of combative or unfriendly kind of pursuit to be undertaken, and a lot of people don't want that competition because they feel somebody wants to knock them the hell out and you know, push them back down the ladder or whatever it is, or send them flying. You know, I think generally if we're a community, you know, that's binded together by or is bound together by this music, we shouldn't worry too much about that, you know, because people come up, then somebody else comes up, then somebody else comes up. Everyone sort of has their time, you know, and it is sometimes time for somebody else to have their time, and then somebody can literally just sort of go into hibernation for a while, or maybe not be on the tip of everyone's tongue all the time, but then all of a sudden they come back. So it's not that you only have one time. I think that's the point I'm trying to make, is that it's natural to have this sort of ongoing organic development of artists coming up, and then as a result going back down in the scene, you know. And I think we need to encourage that, and to recognize that happens one way or the other. If somebody is always trying to hang on to their place and whatever, but not trying to get much better at what they're doing, I mean, I think that's sort of unrealistic, because by and large, if you're not getting better, or you're not creating something new, or doing something that is now the new standard or whatever, you are going to get found out, or you're not going to be as relevant in another few years' time. And I think sometimes you just have to allow things to develop, and I don't know. Sorry, maybe I'm going on about it a little bit, but I do see this in the scene sometimes, that people can be overly protective of what they have, instead of welcoming people in, and realizing that they have something new and interesting to give as well, and that they deserve a crack at this too.
Indeed. And I saw in an interview you mentioned that one of your aspirations was to develop your own style, both DJing and producing. Do you feel you got to that point?
Yeah, actually funny, because I remember at that particular interview, I feel I was taken out of context in a couple of times in that. I certainly wasn't quoted correctly in it, but that particular one you were saying, I think how I was quoted there was that it was something like my main ambition was always to have my own style. And I think a couple of people actually said to me afterwards, like, oh, but you do kind of have your own style. And of DJing or whatever. I think what I was saying there was, that's always been my ambition. So it doesn't mean that you can't achieve that, but you have to develop it as well. So it's always about honing your style, you know. So for me, it was about having my own style of DJing, which I think I sort of did get over time, not straight away, obviously, but I feel I sort of developed my own style of DJing probably long before I did that interview. So whereas maybe in the interview it makes it look like I was still looking for that, you know. But at the same time, I think whenever you achieve something or develop something, or you think, oh, this is what I do, this is my style or whatever, that's the time then you need to try a little bit harder again. You know, it's like at any stage of feeling that you're the finished article, that's the time to worry, actually. If you think you're perfect or the best you can possibly be, that's there's no room for complacency in this. And I mean, especially even from a, what would you say, from a scene climbing point of view, as well, I think things can change very, very quickly in the scene as well. So if you're, and things can change these days. Like before, the changes in the scene could sometimes, and people coming through in the scene, yeah, I don't know. I feel the scene has actually refreshed itself very, very quickly in the last year or two. And it probably goes back to what I was saying there about bringing new blood and stuff through. So it's probably part of what I was talking about. It's happened particularly fast in the last couple of years. And I think what's going to happen soon again is that, you know, DJs that want to come back up in the scene again will maybe need to prove themselves in other kinds of ways as well. So I think it's always important, and regardless of even about whether you get gigs or not or all this kind of thing, I think just in general, I mean, I think DJing is almost like a martial art, you know. It's something that you can always keep getting better at, you know. So you think you're a black belt, okay, you're a black belt, but you know, you can be you can go up a few notches with that black belt as well. I don't know, how many can you go up, 7 or 8 or something like that, is it, as a black belt in martial arts? I can't remember. I
don't know. Yeah, but
I don't know. So I've heard of people who are like 7th Dan black belts and stuff like this. I mean, so you know, you could get your black belt in DJing at whatever time of your career. But, you know, once you've got that black belt, there's still a lot more room to go. I mean, there's a lot of those people that are out of, they're not competing anymore, but they're going up a notch. Some of the older practitioners in martial arts, you know, and I think DJing is a little bit like that as well. I'm pretty sure that there's a lot of DJs out there who don't DJ out anymore, and they would kick the fuck out of people on the decks if they came, if they came out of retirements. They would totally. I tell you, Freddie Fresh would kick the fuck out of most DJs out there at the moment. And I even heard a set of his. He just instantly sprung to mind there. But I mean, there are people like him. They're like from plenty of different locations around the world who stopped DJing. But if you put it to them now and said, listen, you know, your child needs a life-changing operation now, and the only way you can get the money to do that is to play a set now and play the best set you can ever play. Okay, sorry, this is a terrible example. It was a matter of life and death, okay? And you were telling that DJ who hadn't DJed or was still DJing a little bit at home, but hadn't necessarily been playing out for a while or whatever. If they're of a certain level, they put in the hours, they have the technique, they would step up and kick the absolute living shit out of a lot of DJs now. I completely believe that, you know. Yeah. And I think we should always, as DJs, be mindful that there are people that wrote the rules, not that there should be rules, but that literally wrote the book, whatever you want to call it, that they pushed the craft to its absolute limit on many occasions in the past. They helped pioneer DJing. So
yeah, for sure. I absolutely love the analogy with martial arts and sport in general. Like, do you train or how much do you train for your DJing?
Yeah, that's something I'm not overly happy about actually these days. I don't really get to practice as much as I'd like to, and I say out of all of the things that freaks me out sometimes in the run up to a gig, it's that I haven't really practiced. And I'm trying to kind of force myself to sometimes. I got to say it's a problem I have. It is actually a problem because on one hand I advocate practicing and putting all the time into it, but on the other hand I find that quite hard to do myself sometimes actually.
Yeah.
And it's I don't know what it is. I've spoken to speaking to a friend of mine, Jamie Behan, about this recently. He has something similar, I think. I don't know if it's the same, but he definitely related to what I was saying about you know, having turntables there and having records around and that, but not feeling the desire to right. practice the way, you know, I used to before. It's sometimes, I guess, life or commitments and all of these things can kind of not come on top, but can take up a bit more time than they used to during the week. Yeah. And then by the time it gets to a Thursday, I used to Thursday night was a night I used to stay up really late, and I used to get up like really tired on a Friday morning going to a gig, because I'd been up quite late and I'd be mixing and I'd be going through different records, or this track with certain combinations worked. I mean, and particularly those kind of ones will be the ones where you like where certain vocals would work together from one track to another, and you go, right, oh, that's a handy one. I'll use that tomorrow. Or I mean, DJs that say that they don't, that stuff just comes to them at gigs. A lot of the time it does. I'd say 75% or more. It just happens there and then. But the really good ones, the really good mixes, sometimes, of which there could be a couple that you will use during a set, some of those do come through practicing, you know.
Yeah.
And it's like knowing those different combinations before you go out. Sometimes can be really good. Unfortunately, I haven't had as much time to sort of practice those kind of things as I used to. But in saying that, as you get, and it's coming back to what I was saying there about the longer you're at this and the more hours you put in general, and a lot of our practice and the hours we put in are in the clubs as well. So there are little combinations that you're actually sort of learning from this set that you played, and then you might try it again the next week or whatever. So I guess what's probably changed for me is a lot of my practice now is more so confined to clubs rather than at home. But I want to sort of, I want to sort of change that balance a little bit back to practicing a little bit more at home than I do now. I am a little bit, but just not as much as I'd like to.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. And to be honest, I think you do have your own unique style of DJing. Totally. Like, and I completely agree with you. Like, you can always improve it, and it's great to practice and improve it. I'm trying to remember the first time I saw you playing, and I think it must have been like 2014 in here in London. I think you were playing together with Karen. I mean, the same lineup. And
yeah, I remember that was a good one.
Yeah, I think it was. I
enjoyed that gig. Yeah. That was that in studio spaces in E1, where E1 is now, is it?
Correct. Yes, exactly. That was it. Yes, and I remember I was with a friend of mine. He just had arrived to London at that time, and I just moved to London at that time. And I remember Karen played a great set, and then I think you were after, and then I remember I saw this guy, meaning you, who was playing this super fast techno, super fast in playing records. I think you were playing with 2 turntables, and you played something like 70 or 80 records in 2 hours, which was like less than one every 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Fuck, I love it. I love this guy. I love the style. And I remember there was one thing that struck a chord with me was the fact that you were not touching the record, but you were adjusting the speed just by using the pitch.
Yeah.
Is this something you consciously developed, or it kind of came natural?
Yeah, I think it was probably a natural thing, because I didn't learn off anybody, so I wasn't really. I mean, as much as if I could have had the chance to watch DJs back in the early days, I probably would have. But a combination of not thinking of it, and I don't know why I didn't. I guess maybe I did a little bit, but I wasn't. The things like the pitch control wasn't something. I don't know. A lot of people used to push the records, and I think that was what sort of made. I never liked the look of that, actually, to be honest. Then again, I wasn't really seeing people using the pitch in the same way exactly, but what I was kind of more so, if I was looking at other DJs, I was more so picking out what I didn't like, you know. And the thing I noticed with well, no, don't get me wrong, I was seeing stuff I really liked, but I didn't really know what they were doing either. If I saw somebody mixing kind of quick or getting from one track to the next really fast, I wasn't able to totally relate to that, because I hadn't developed my ear at that point to be able to mix that fast. So it wasn't like I just saw somebody mixing incredibly well like that and thought, oh, I'm going to do that. You know what I mean? But over time, I knew I could mix pretty fast. But I think over time, as you get to use the pitch controls to your advantage in a way that it's going to speed up the mix, or speed up fixing a mistake or whatever. Once you get to that level with it, and it's actually faster for you than pushing the record, because some people will say that pushing the platter and nudging the records is quicker for them, and it actually is for some of them. But that's also because they didn't ever really try it with the pitch alone. For me, I just tried. I just only did it with the pitch. I always used to look at a turntable, and maybe, you know what? Maybe part of it is because the only people who I hung around with in the early days who DJ'd, who I might have looked at a little bit, they were using belt drive decks.
All right.
Belt drives are not really ones that you can really touch, you know, not really anyway. They
stops, yeah.
Yeah, to me, like looking at a belt drive or looking at those kind of turntables, it's kind of like it's almost like looking at just a standard kind of record player that you play, you know, classic, you know, that your parents are so. It's just like it's just almost like a standard record player, rather than a more kind of robust direct drive turntable. So from an early time, I just sort of thought, I just never saw that I would want to touch the record really, even though, you know, I think from what I remember, a couple of people I knew who are talking about there probably still were touching it a little bit. So I was seeing that in other people, but I just never thought that I wanted to do that myself. And plus any of the practice I was doing was always on my own at home. So listen, you just pick up habits or techniques. I know on the DJ course now, I'm always trying to sort of get people out of that habit of pushing the platter or pushing the records. Not entirely. I used to be more militant about it. Now I kind of just try to show them this way and show them that it can work equally well, if not better for them if they tried it. But the thing with back then was it was literally, while I'm trying to get people out of the habit, the difference with me back then was that was the habit I got into. So it wasn't a habit I got out of. I would always consider it to be a good habit, which is why I always stayed with it. So
yeah, it works. I mean, if it works, that's great. And I wanted to ask you, I mean, this is a question from the audience. Like, how many records do you have at the moment? Like, do you have an idea of how many have you?
I don't know. I think it's definitely over. I think it's definitely over 10,000 anyway.
Wow.
I'm not too sure how many, because see, they're in different places. So I mean, I sort of estimated, maybe, because I was trying to think of this recently, maybe somewhere in the, I don't know, I think it could be it would probably be actually a bit more than 10,000.
Wow.
But I'm not too sure. Again, though, I don't know. I don't actually know, because the thing is they're all in different places. So even the room that I'm using for turntables now, that's only where I've got some of my. I've only actually, where I'm using now only has some records in it. But then the room where I have a fair few of my records, that only has some of them. So they're in, at the moment, my record collection is in about 4, maybe 5 different places. It's not all in the one place. So it's hard for me to know exactly what I have. It was just the other day I was sort of looking at, like, in one room I have roughly, it looks like around 5,000 in one room. So then I was trying to sort of because like a lot of people have asked me that question, and the answer is I don't really know, but I just know in one of the rooms that I have, I've about 5,000, and I figured that I had at least that in other places. But actually, I'm thinking of somewhere else where I have records as well, and maybe I would have underestimated it. So it's somewhere in the. I actually don't even know.
Wow. It's a big collection anyways. And another question so now thinking about your production and your record label, like, is there anything that you think inspired you both in your production and the way you select music for your record label outside of music? Perhaps Dublin or...
well, like in terms of Earwiggle, probably was Dublin actually at the beginning, because the first person who I released was Anodyne, and he's from Clondalkin, which is a bit up the road from where I live. And actually, by coincidence, his uncle is my granddad's next door neighbour.
Wow.
It was bizarre. I remember I was out cutting the grass for my granddad one day, and I got talking to Jim next door, and he was saying, "Oh, you do music and all the rest, don't you?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he says, "Oh, my nephew does a bit of that." And I was expecting him to say, you know, some commercial DJ that played in some place in town. But then when he said Anodyne, I was like, "What?" I said, "He's like one of the he's one of the producers I most rate from Ireland, you know. So it was so shortly after that we or was it around I don't know. I mean, it comes and goes a little bit in terms of like surroundings. I think at the beginning, I did do a label before as well that was all about just local acts and the local area. I mean, I suppose music making even can be personal if you're doing field recordings and stuff like that. So from that point perspective, I mean, my surroundings at certain points, maybe not as much now, but my surroundings were quite important for a certain stage of my productions, in that I was doing a lot more field recording at one point and using a lot more bits as percussion and stuff like that, or just using certain, you know, recordings as background atmosphere and stuff like that. I don't do that as much as I used to, but I do sometimes think I think, and it's like what we're talking about with clubs and stuff as well. I think it's I think coming back to your local area and community and building it from grassroots, kind of from the bottom up and from small beginnings and something smaller and more community based. I think that's very, very important for everybody. It's definitely important to me, and I think I do want to go back to my roots a little bit more in that way. And I think though a lot of the time in scenes as well, we're kind of we sort of come straight into a scene that's already relying heavily on big headliner DJs to come over, and it's only about big events and all the rest. But I think a lot of about running a record label as well is being able to showcase acts. And I think and it's probably something I've not done enough in the way of events. And whether it's going to be people on the label or not, I think in the future I do want to be part of a more localized kind of scene as well, not just in Dublin but around the country. And I mean, I think that's already something that I'm part of with our campaign to change nightlife. But I can sort of see developments happening on lots of different levels, other than just like opening hours and licensing. Although that once we change the laws, it will open up a lot of other opportunities for young artists. And I think it's at that point. I mean, there are people within the scene here, like Olin from All City would probably be the best example. Somebody who is really helping to strengthen the local, the kind of the infrastructure for local producers and labels. So whether he's releasing someone or helping someone start their first label, that's really, really beneficial. And I think that's one of the benefits of a local record shop. So for me, a lot of the things that inspired me was working in a record shop. So, that feels like my home. And there's two record shops. There's Spin Dizzy, where I worked for 8 or 9 years. And that's that was the best musical education I ever got, you know. And there's not so many shops out there now, but I would recommend to anybody is to try your best, if you can, to get a job in a record shop, even if it's only part-time. I mean, sometimes it will take going in and hassling that owner of that shop for you might have to hassle them for a few years. I mean, there's a guy here, Lee Kelly, really good DJ and producer from here in Dublin, but I know he used to go in and hassle Olin for years. It was almost like it was a joke. I didn't even know if he really wanted a job there, but he'd be talking about a job. I just thought it became this sort of gag or this thing that he'd be saying, give us a job, or I want to work here. Because at that time I never really knew Lee to be working. I'm sure he was working, but I didn't know what he was working at. I knew that he liked coming into the record shop. So I sometimes wondered if Olin did offer him a job, whether he'd take it or not. But he did one day, and Lee has been working there since. And I mean, he's put out a number of records. He compiled a kind of this big compilation that they put together recently, a kind of a charity compilation that they did just as the coronavirus thing hit and the shop closed. But I think working in shops is something that can always inspire. I mean, it can inspire at the time, but it can inspire in the future as well. And I find that even going back, if I'm let's say, going back to older records, or if I'm thinking about doing maybe like more of an alternative mix or something like that, I'm always tending to sort of look into the I kind of look into that time and that era, and I tend to be kind of informed by things that I learned in Spin Busy particularly. But I think the actual experience and that community aspect of what can be achieved both through clubs and through the coming together and sharing of information in record shops, those two things are very important for me. I think for a lot of other people, it comes through travel. And over time, from traveling more to other countries, I guess some of that stuff can kind of rub off. But that's probably rubbed off more on me in a way in relation to our campaign, you know, because I'm seeing how lots of other countries run nightlife and the infrastructure around nightlife and even the political situation or the strictness around the conditions for clubs and venues and how they're supported by the council or government or other kinds of organizations or bodies. That's something that's kind of influenced me a lot. So on one hand, I'm doing the label. I'll be honest, the label has to come second a lot of the time these days. It's the campaign first. I would say at times the campaign is above everything, including my own DJ career. And sometimes you have to make those sort of compromises to make something else work. So
and I want to make sure we talk about the campaign. Just to wrap up on the label. So what was the initial idea behind the label? Was to kind of support your local scene and give space to
a little bit actually. The label before, I was kind of doing that, and it was all Irish acts, but I found that it was tricky to do. I mean, we had about, I think, maybe 4 12-inches, and then I did an album by a guy called Ed Devan, who to me, the music he put out there then is still a bit ahead of its time now. I mean, he's a really incredible producer. He actually got more into like making his own instruments. He's a really interesting guy on lots of levels, both with his kind of artistic work outside of just purely making music. You know, he's many things actually, not only a music maker. But I think after I did that album by him, I was a little bit disappointed by that experience, and the market was changing a little bit as well. And I just figured that rather than continue the label and just sort of have more disappointments, that I needed to just sort of what I wanted to do was to start up another label, bring it back up to another kind of level, while still involving local producers, but maybe by creating those parameters that it had to be just my mates that I was releasing. Maybe that wasn't necessary, because at that point as well, there was a lot of other producers coming through, or not even coming through, people who had sort of fallen into the wilderness, people who I wanted to bring back out of there, bring out of hibernation. So the early releases on Earwiggle were literally me contacting some old heroes and asking would they make some music again, or could I put out a record by them. So the records was so the first one, Anodyne, was different in that we'd already developed a friendship or a relationship from because I'd released some of his other music before that under the name of Purest Hatred. But the first one, he was making loads of music then as well. And it just made sense for him to be the first release. But like I said, it wasn't going to be all Irish releases. So after that, it was Steve Stahl. And then I really wanted Freddie Fresh to do something too. So I mentioned him earlier, actually. But I already knew Paul Birkin a bit, and I'd done something on his label a number of years before that. So, and he wanted to do something on the label, but and I knew that he was making music with Freddie as well, so that worked out perfectly. So, so Paul and Freddie were the next one, and then Des Williams. Now it was weird because on one hand, you've got some older producers that, you know, they've got a lot of commitments, they've families, and they're married, they have dogs and cats and jobs and all of this. And then you've got the other kind of younger producer who has lots of time on their hands, possibly, doesn't have as many commitments and is making lots and lots of tracks. So I think over time, I think the age profile of a lot of the earlier releases was a bit older. Actually, it was a lot of people that I was trying to get music from and kind of push them into making more music again. But that changed over time. Actually, I think one thing that I don't know if there's any label that I was directly influenced by with the early stuff, but I certainly never felt restricted by tempo. And that was I mean, if you listen to the first one by Anodyne, I mean, that's all over the place with tempo. So I see a lot of people these days talking, and it'll always be that way. I mean, back in the 90s and that, people were always talking about tempos and BPMs and stuff. But I think now it's become this sort of like, it almost kind of supersedes the quality of the music sometimes, or people say, oh yeah, they finished their set at such and such BPM, and I'm kind of wondering like, yeah, but what music did they play? What tracks did they hear? What happened? Like, you know, oh, you're just going to, like, I mean, I remember this a number of years back. People sometimes used to come up to the mixer at the end of a set, and they'd look at what BPM I finished at or whatever, and they go, oh no, you finished at 153, no way, or whatever. And I mean, for me, tempo has always been, especially since I started the label as well. I mean, I never feel there should be a rule on that. The only thing that's ever created rules is the market in terms of the actual the record selling or not, you know. Yep. And that was but I think if you're just going out to kind of match the market, then you know you're already starting at with a little bit of a handicap, you know. So that was not from the beginning. Things like tempo, there were definitely no rules or set parameters in that way.
Yeah, it makes sense. And then now, so shifting to your other activities. So you are DJ producer, you run your label, and I've seen in the past you had this show on RTE FM, which basically was DJ sets, but also you hosted people you had interviews with. How did that come about?
So this is the one where I was doing the radio show and I was interviewing them and stuff on it, was it?
Yeah, correct. Yes. So you interviewed people like Surgeon, Jeff Mills at some point. I've seen a bunch of interviews online, I think on your SoundCloud. And I think you said in an interview that it started off as a DJ set. You were hosting these DJ sets, and then eventually you became also interviewing some of these people and artists.
I felt, I mean, I've a lot of the things I've tried to put into the scene are things that I feel left the scene, if that makes sense, or that were missing from the scene. I don't really like doing exactly what everybody else does, because if other people are doing it already, there's no need for me to be doing it particularly, you know. So in this regard, I mean, I realized that there were no real interviews and actual dialogue going on with some of the producers and DJs of the time who were kind of making a mark in the harder ends of techno. But also, a lot of the people I chose for that were people that I knew reasonably well, or some of whom were closer friends or whatever, that I wanted to get on, and I wanted to get them on and to just talk to them, you know. I think like we're having this conversation now, I think there's a lot more you can get out of a real life conversation rather than something that's written, you know. So and listen, sometimes there's a lot you can get from a written interview as well, but I think from reading this, but I in this way I wanted to just make it a little bit more of a feature of the show. I think I wanted, because I was doing a monthly show on 2FM, and I wanted it to be more a show. I didn't want it just to be a mix. And I think they had asked me to do a second hour. And so I thought, right, well, if I do a second hour and I'm going to feature somebody on it, or put a mix on it or whatever, they have to tie into the rest of the show in some way, hopefully. Or else I made a kind of more a three-way thing then, where I'd get a guest mix from someone, then I'd interview someone else, and then I'd play some tracks either side too. So I just wanted this as a show. I wanted it to have a few more features as a show, and I think part of that was, I mean, some people will tell you on radio that, you know, especially national radio or on more mainstream radio, that you shouldn't really be interviewing people for too long. If it's on daytime radio, you know, you just get in, you get the main info, and they're gone again. But I like the idea of actually just doing a proper chat with someone and stop when it's meant to stop, you know. In fairness, Tim, who's the producer in there, he'd be kind of telling me to wrap it up at like, you know, 10, 15 minutes. Invariably, it went on longer, maybe 20, 25 minutes. But I tried to keep a bit, not a limit to it, but I tried to make sure there was more than enough. But I think the one with Surgeon actually was around an hour, but some of the other ones generally were anywhere between 15 minutes and half an hour, which gives you enough time to catch up on what they've been doing, dig into the past a little bit, because I think digging into the past is one of the best ways of being inspired for the future, because whatever everybody is doing now, this is something that people have done in the past as well. And I think it's great to learn from other people's experiences. A lot of times certain producers will come up on a certain hype label of now, but a lot of people don't necessarily know the backstory behind that. From my situation, I will know a bit of the backstory, but there will be parts that I really want to know as well. So there were certain questions I might have put to Jeff Mills in that interview that I really wanted to know, you know. So it's about kind of delving into the past and maybe just things that I'm unaware of, that I think that. Sometimes I think sometimes when you're interviewing as well, you do definitely have a responsibility for the people that you're asking the questions on behalf of, i.e. the listener, or if I'm doing, you know, a guest interview with somebody for the students in the college and somebody comes in and sits down, you are doing it for the benefit of the listener. But a lot of the time, you know, I think there should be a genuine curiosity on your own part as well to want to find out certain questions and answers yourself, or certain answers yourself. So in that regard, I've always it was just a natural. I think a lot of things should feel like a little bit of a natural extension of yourself and what it is you want to do, or how it is that you feel about something, rather than just sort of tacking it on and placing it in there because that's the thing to do. You know, for me, I like to just do something because I feel it's, number one, that possibly it's not been done by others. And also that it's just something that I feel quite comfortable doing as well. And I mean, interviewing people or talking, as I'm sure you're getting from this interview now, I like talking. So I'm very comfortable in that. I think though, when you're broadcasting, when you're going on radio stations or you're doing podcasts and stuff, it does take a certain level of, you do have to kind of hone your style a little bit in that regard as well. For radio and that too. So I think there's an aspect of self-development in there as well that's quite important and beneficial to you as a host too. So that's something that I would have found good too. So I mean, this can help us in our everyday life. It can help us if we have any aspirations in political life, whatever it might be. Talking and engaging with people in a way where other people can listen in too, like if it was a live setting in a room, like where you have different guests, or on radio. I think that's all. I think that kind of thing is very beneficial to DJs in general, because I've asked a lot of my students in the past, do they all know what their favorite DJ sounds like? I said, you probably all do. And they'll go, yeah, we do. And I kind of say, well, you know, why is that? And the reason is because they've heard them host their own radio show, or they've heard them on this, doing an interview with someone, or whatever it might be. So I think that's one angle that a lot of DJs, or one aspect of this, that DJs, if they can, should try to familiarize themselves with, or get a little bit of practice in, or be more than that, just become comfortable in, because that is an area that it's very hard to feel comfortable in it at the beginning. If you have it, what were we going to say? Sorry.
No, I was going to say, I mean, it's a skill in itself. Like you say that, like you need to hone your style, and it's a skill that you then eventually use in the rest of your life. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, like if you go in and do a gig, or do a set that you're naturally kind of nervous about or whatever, it's because you're either unprepared or just the emotion, the feeling of the moment is kind of taken over a little bit, and you're naturally feeling nervous, which is a good thing, can be positive as well. But I think with broadcasting and that, there's another level of kind of anxiety or feeling very self-conscious that a lot of people have when it comes to talking. Actually, they'll be fine. They'll have got over the jitters of maybe playing in front of people, but there's the talking in front of people, which is another obstacle, and I think is an obstacle that that DJs or anybody should try and get over if they can, because that is another, like I said, the obstacle of playing in front of people or playing live on the radio or whatever, that they're separate obstacles, but I think talking as well is another one. And I think once you get over that, it can just make you a little bit more confident as a person, and it can make you a little bit more confident as well in how your opinion and views kind of matter and are relevant, because if you're broadcasting your views to a lot, I mean, there can be a dangerous slippery slope to that as well if you're an absolute lunatic, if you're some right-wing maniac or something, like that. But I mean, the more you can project your voice in a positive way and be comfortable in that, the more confidence that can give you going forward, and the more confidence it can give you in your own ideas and opinions as well. So I think I think radio is very beneficial, especially the chat and talking side of things.
It's the kind of thing that is a win-win-win. So it's a win for the audience, it's a win for the interviewer and the interviewee, potentially the guest. I mean, this is basically the same reason why we started the HoS Sound, and the idea was to eventually get deeper into what's beyond the music of artists and creators, and understand them as people, but also on the other side, to excite, share information with the audience. And so I completely agree with what you said. I think it's a in a way, even for me personally, I feel that I'm I can ask questions to people that I would not be able to ask otherwise, and I improve. I'm kind of forced to improve every day. Every interview I do, I get one step better. So I think it's a massive win-win-win-win for everybody involved.
Yeah, it's growing. It's about growth, and I mean, I think in our scene in general, I mean, we should always. I think the scene tends to look back an awful lot, and a lot of the time, it doesn't always feel like the scene in general, musically, maybe is always growing at a pace that it used to or that it could. But if we're all growing as individuals and we're sharing knowledge, and I mean, the beauty of something like this as well is that if you're doing an interview, or if I'm doing an interview, so we're finding out the answer at the exact same time as the people that are listening as well. Yeah. So I've always enjoyed the sharing of information, and I'm definitely not one of those DJs as well that wants to hide information or hide track names or any of that kind of thing. I mean, I think sometimes we can be quite protective of information and knowledge as DJs, but I think overall, and listen, it's understandable if you've paid 50 quid for a record or something, and then somebody's asking for the name of the track, that they're about to play, that they're about to buy on Beatport for a couple of euros and play out as well. I can understand that aspect for DJs being kind of protective of certain tracks or records. I understand that, but I think we have a duty to always share the knowledge and share the names, music. And sorry, I'm probably flipping it a little bit, but to go into music now. But I think that's one duty we have as DJs. If somebody asks us the name of the track, we should tell people the name of the track. We didn't make that. 9 times out of 10, it wasn't a track or more. It wasn't a track that we made. So why would you conceal that? Why would you? Okay, listen, that producer might have even forgot they made that track now. They mightn't even still be making music anymore. But if somebody keeps playing their tracks and they start getting contacted about those tracks, and then all of a sudden a record comes out of old tracks, and then maybe that person goes, you know what, maybe I'll do a bit of music again. I mean, it can have a knock-on effect. And I think to try and sort of, a lot of people gave up, like we were speaking earlier, they gave up music because there weren't the rewards in it. Now, those rewards could come much later on in their career. And for you to kind of deny a producer or a label or whoever that credit that they deserve, I think that's actually inherently wrong. I understand why DJs might want to conceal track names, but I think as a DJ, you have a duty to let others know, because a lot of the time these tracks are often by DJs or producers that didn't have a huge discography,
Right.
or even if they did have a big discography, that they've kind of pulled back on making music or don't do as much anymore. Also, there's a lot of producers that made certain styles years ago that are now making something completely different. So for somebody to come to them and go, oh, I love that record you did in '95, or I was playing this thing you released and wow, oh, brilliant track or whatever, that might give them a good feeling that day, you know. And I think I think it gives everyone a good feeling. It gives more of a good feeling to others than the feeling that you get by not giving it to them. So if someone says, what's the name of that track, and you say no to them, so you're just restricting them from doing something, and you're keeping them at bay, and you're keeping that a secret. But if you tell them, you'll feel happy that you told them, hopefully. In the long run, you mightn't there and then, you might go, oh, fuck, I don't want to tell them the name. But then, now that you've let it go, they're happy that they know the name. Now you're happy that they're happy about that. And who knows, maybe the producer down the line will find out, and maybe the label, everybody's happy. So I think there's far more benefits from actually telling people the name of a track and giving IDs to tracks if people ask you.
Absolutely. And also, like, when you translate this in concept to sharing information, like, if you let's make this scenario. So if you discover something and is, I don't know, whatever, like a better way of releasing records, and I discovered something which is a better way of pushing things on Spotify, and we keep it for ourselves, like the positive effect is restricted to each of us essentially. If we share it amongst ourselves, like I'm already like contributing to you, you're contributing to me, so already the delta is bigger. If we find a way to record it and a way to share it with a broader audience, we're kind of broadcasting the positive effect and the learnings from each one of us to make it available to many other people, which has a much bigger effect if you think about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, like, and even like techno music or electronic music or music in general, I mean, it's all one big catalog that got released for public consumption, you know. And a lot of music that we would have found out through other DJs or from listening to old mixtapes. I mean, there could have been DJs that turned us onto a certain track as well, you know. So I think it's coming back to that sort of the duty that we have and the good that can come from it. I mean, there could be something in that track that will push another producer to make something similar, or to try and do something that will turn into a particular records that you yourself will then play out in a few months, you know. So it can have nothing but a benefit. I mean, I can understand, and I mean, everyone, you know, I'd be wrong by not saying this, that there are certain tracks that, you know, I would have played out in sets that people might have linked to me playing. You know, they weren't my tracks, but they were someone else's, and people would have linked that to me. And then I start to see somebody else playing it out a little bit. And you can kind of go, oh, Jesus, that's one I play, or that's my track, or you know what I mean? But really, you can't have any arguments, really, you know. It's natural to feel that, but you can't really have an argument. I mean, if that person feels strongly enough that they're going to play it too, then they love the track as well. You might say, oh, but I love the track more. Maybe you do, but maybe you both love it the same amount. Maybe it means just as much. See, a lot of the time it's about the time and the place as well. So we tend to romanticize tracks a lot as well. So if a track came out in 2002, for instance, or 2003, and you remember it coming out that year, you remember the second getting the white label or getting it when it went onto the shelf and playing it that week, and that's as fresh as it gets. So you're always going to romanticize that a little bit in your mind, and you're going to have a sentimentality attached to it. But at the same time, a DJ that finds it now, or even just a listener, somebody who just listens to it and enjoys it just as much. In fact, a lot of the time the listeners and the people that are going out dancing enjoy it more than you, because they actually get to dance to us properly, whereas you're playing it, you know. So I think we can all get different things out of the track, but I think it's important to kind of share it definitely, and listen, no one's taking that experience away from you. If you got it or heard it back in the day, that's yours. No one's taking that away from you. That will always be your special moments with that record, with that track. in that club with those people. That's yours. You own it. It's always yours, you know. But someone else now will get something from it as well. Maybe it won't be as much, but they'll get something, and give it to them, you know, give it to them.
Yeah, maybe you could be the cause for for another person to feel another amazing moment, and I think we have a duty to do that. I mean, it's nonsense not doing it, and it seems to you.
I think so. And listen, there's nothing worse than getting an awful lot out of a piece of music, whether you heard it in a club, whether you heard it on a mix, and agonizing for years, not knowing what it was, and not ever hearing it again either. That's another one. There are tracks from certain mixes in the past that I'll never know what they were, and I hope I'll find out. I mean, I have tracked. I've nearly sent out I've nearly hired like private investigators to find out certain track names, and I can't. I literally I can't. There's a couple. There's one in particular. I mean, it was from an old. I was from an old set that was played in the Omen years ago, and in Frankfurt, and the mix has never popped up online. And I remember this particular track because it was always in an ad on MTV at the time, like Party Zone or one of these kind of ones. And I remember there being an old CJ Bolan track being played in it as well. And I matched. You know, I put out keywords, and I've done a lot of certain deep digging on the internet to see would it pop up, and it just never popped up. I never found that ads that it was in. I mean, there's just, but one of the tracks the track I'm looking for, I've never been out. It's never popped up in that mix. That ad has never popped up. One day I'll find it, but it's like, and I'm not someone that's always like digging, looking for old tracks. I feel like got a lot of them, and if I find others along the way, great. But that particular one, it's sort of annoying me because I've always, I'm sure everyone has lots of tracks they want to find, but I know if somebody told me, and it'd be kind of funny because somebody could tell you what it is, and you'd go, well, you mightn't say, oh, I have that record, but you might go, oh, I have loads on that label, or I know that. How did I not know it was that producer? Or, you know what I mean? I mean, it's funny as well with old tracks when you're trying to track them down. There was an old track that I remember Carl Cox playing on an old mix CD that he did, and one of the tracks on it is actually an old track by Vince Watson, but it's like a really, it's like an old sort of hardcore techno kind of thing. But I remember on the mix, so he's kind of blending two tunes together. Carl Cox used to be great at kind of marrying two tracks into one, sometimes three, where they'd sound like all the same track. And I remember I remember seeing the track list a few years after or whatever, and going, right, I need to get that track eventually. And this was like a bit before Discogs had kicked off and stuff. Or maybe it was as Discogs had kicked off and I saw the name. And eventually I tracked down the records. And I remember getting the record, putting the needle on, and I was like, oh, I can't wait for this. I can't wait to hear this. I'm gonna smash this out now. And as it came through the door that day or whatever. And then I was going through and I was going, okay, that's grand, but where's the bit? Where's that bit gone? And then I realized, no, that bit was actually Carl Cox
making it,
something else over the top of it, make it seem like it was another sequence, another sound. And he was particularly good at that. And the track was never the same for me after that. I was thinking the only way I could make that sound the same is by just doing the mix with the same two tracks the way Carl Cox did. But what's the point in that? He did that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's interesting sometimes when you do eventually track down one of those tunes, and then you realize it sounds different to actually what you thought. So.
And it comes down to the moment. But I wanted to make sure that, like, now going through the wrap up, to talk about the Give Us the Night, which is your campaign that you're running. Do you want to give like a very quick intro of what is the campaign, why you're doing that for the audience?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think one of the things for, Ireland has the most restrictive laws for nighttime venues and nightlife and the licensing of events in Europe, actually, and one of the most restrictive in the world. Not the most, but one of the most. A lot of it has to do with kind of the foundation of the state and where it was at back then. You know, the church had a lot of control of young people, and society in general had to kind of listen to what the Catholic Church said. I guess it was that way in a lot of countries. But as a result, it was to a large degree, it was the church and priests deciding what young people would do at night and how they would congregate and how many people would be together. And there was also there were different sort of aspects or different. It wasn't all just to do with the Catholic Church either, but there were the idea of people congregating and dancing and staying up late very much went against the teachings of the church. People could be out and staying up all night was not something that sat well with legislators or anybody in control back then. And I guess it was that way around the world. But over time, that was loosened in most countries. It wasn't loosened in Ireland. Another thing as well, we have a great tradition for Irish pubs here, and it's one of the greatest exports of Ireland, not just some of the drink, the actual pub as a business, as a place.
Wow.
So we've always had a very strong pub industry here, and as in modern times, as the pub industry started to feel a little bit of a squeeze, I would say 20 odd years ago, and their business or industry was starting to become smaller. That's when the squeeze started to come against the late night stuff. So listen, the late night stuff, we never had great laws to start with. I mean, it wasn't like you could stay out all night in Ireland before. Well, you could, but it was always under loopholes. It was always through using a certain license that wasn't really meant to be used for that, but there was a way around it, if you know what I mean. So, using a theatre license was one way. There were other ways of using a late night license if you serve foods and then go a little bit later. There were little kind of quirks in the legislation that would allow you to go till late. But we've been crying out for legislation for many decades now. I would say since the beginning of the discotheque era, to actually have the correct type of license for a late night venue. Right now, we're all operating under pub legislation, and the extra hours that we get after pubs are really just to facilitate extra drinking at the bar. They're not really. That's what it's become now, and our country has become mostly the late night scene has become mostly a country of late bars. And listen, if that's what works for the pubs and for the bars, let them at us. So we I don't want to see. I'm proud of the Irish pub. I don't know many people that aren't. And I love the traditional Irish pubs we have. I love that it is also a great place for people to come together, and it does provide that kind of community space for people in local areas to come together. But there are people, particularly younger people now as well, who and sometimes older people now who are just used to going out late, particularly in other countries as well, who need that extra layer. I don't need to say to you or to any of our listeners, but this is the kind of arguments, the kind of ridiculous, almost futile arguments that we have to be making with legislators and with politicians and media here, is that we need extra time beyond just the time that late bars open till, which is 2:30, and down the country outside of Dublin, a lot of places are 2 a.m. So we're crying out for modernisation of our laws, and to go back to that, the squeeze started to come on to late night venues in the early 2000s, and at that point, late bars were allowed to go to the same time as nightclubs. And then at that time, nightclubs were saying, "Well, that's grand, but we need our own license now, and we need times that don't leave us at a competitive disadvantage with pubs, because all of a sudden now pubs were kind of killing a little bit of the market for late night venues, because a lot of people were just staying in bars and not going to clubs. Now, I think that's where clubs needed to reinvent the experience a little bit as well. So, a lot of those venues learned the hard way. Listen, both sides didn't have it good, but I think what happened around 2008 which is sort of right at the center of what we're campaigning for now as well, are changes that were made, amendments that were made to licensing that really hurt the late night scene. And that was in the middle of a recession as well. The recession had literally the financial crash had literally just happened. Yep. And rather than helping late night venues, Fianna Fáil, our main government party of the time, decided to restrict them even further and to put greater costs on late night venues. So in one fell swoop, they really destroyed the late night scene, and we lost an awful lot of venues after that. Some of which would have closed down anyway. But I mean, considering since the early 2000s, even around that time and after, the government have promised to put in a new type of license for late night venues, they've still failed to do it. And there's a lot of vested interest in this, you know, from solicitors to pubs to police as well, who would like things to stay the way they are. I think if things change, they would have to adapt. And in not so long, they probably wouldn't be complaining about it. But for now, there are a lot of people that are pushing against us. Yeah. But the way I look at it is this conversation is not going anywhere. It's gathered a lot of momentum. We now have the support of all of the main parties. In fact, the one who there's a question mark above, we kind of put them on the spot over the election campaign as well. And they went on record saying that it's time for a change as well. So the only kind of drawback to this now, obviously the COVID-19 pandemic is bad for everyone and every industry, but it's been quite brutal on the pub industry as well. So I can imagine that they don't want any changes that they feel might threaten their business or their business model, like they, you know, the route they went in the past when they made sure that nightclubs didn't get their own recognition. I think what pubs probably need to really recognize right now and just accept is that most of the people that are going to late night events or clubs, they don't go to pubs, you know. They might, and they might actually even have, they might even have a better feeling towards pubs if they didn't feel that pubs were the ones, you know, pushing against our industry and stopping it from growing. I think one of the things the late night industry really allows and encourages are younger people and younger creative communities and communities of all ages to just come out and experience music and entertainment and art and various types of culture in a different way than the pub, you know. And I think the pub is it definitely has a great future and part to play in Irish nightlife. But I think part of them, I don't want to say surviving as an industry, but maybe improving their place and footing in the late night industry would be to actually embrace this now and maybe try to be even part of it. Because a lot of pub owners are sitting on spaces. A lot of them have basements. Some of them have extra space out the back. Some of them could use function rooms. I think there's a great opportunity here for pubs as well. And I think we're now going into a very uncharted territory now, and that we don't know. Nobody knows, like when the dust settles, where our economies are going to be at. And I think it could be a case of, you know, a lot of towns and cities could literally be like tumbleweeds on a Friday or Saturday night, and it will be literally just be about getting people in there to start with, you know. And I think this is where you know, we can't rely on tourism the way we have done in the past as well. So it's unfortunate that a lot of the conversation has to revolve around the economy and business, but that is the language that those who make these decisions understand.
It makes sense.
But also, if we are to talk from an economic point of view, I mean, there's a lot of us who are making a living out of or working, at least even to supplement our incomes in the nighttime industry. And there's an awful lot of potential in there that's been untapped. I mean, there's a lot of great people that left this country, a lot of our most creative people who came away with, you know, qualifications and with, you know, being really the best in their fields, but left Ireland during the economic downturn because they didn't have, there wasn't, you know, the level of work here. There weren't venues, there weren't interesting projects that could make money that they could be part of. And I think a big part of that is our both through planning, government policy, council policies. We're very, very restrictive in this country. We make it very, very difficult for creative communities. I hate to use the word prosper because it's a word that's been used a lot by previous governments, one in particular, and I don't actually like using using that word. But yes, the creative community really, especially in music, hasn't been allowed to prosper. And now we've ran into a weird situation. I mean, we predicted this and we've spoken about it. A lot of people haven't listened to us, but now that it's happened, I mean, we've said to people quite a lot, particularly in the last couple of years since we relaunched, is that we're relying far too heavily on the festival market. And there's nothing to say that is going to be a stable market and it's going to remain as it has been for the coming 5 or 10 years' time. And if it doesn't stay that way, and then in the meantime, we've knocked down loads of our venues or made it too difficult for venues to remain open, what have we got then? We've got nothing, So I think people need to really start. I think in electronic music we really get it, but I'll be straight up. I think a lot of people within other areas of music and the arts here in Ireland, they don't get that. They don't get that side of things, They don't. They don't guess that a healthy business model for venues to start with is going to result in more gigs, more work, more opportunities for people in this world. There is a way of thinking that, arts and maybe some areas of music should just be funded. I can understand that, and I agree with it to some extent. Definitely, there has to be a good level of funding for the arts. Unfortunately, in these kind of situations, the arts or culture and music, music doesn't even get a look in a lot of the time. And for that reason, I think our scene, the electronic music scene, and maybe some other areas of music as well, we've always been used to being DIY or self-sufficient. Whereas I think other people who are involved in music or within organizations and that, they don't sort of look at it the same way, because they're a lot of their business model or how they actually last or make a living is based on funding. Yeah. And now if that funding isn't going to be there, they're just going to be saying, well, give us more money. We need more money. Whereas on our side of the fence, we're like, okay, listen, they absolutely do need more money. And a lot of the projects and productions, especially when you're getting into theatre productions and other more extravagant kind of art pieces that are a little bit more niche, you do need funding for that. But in our area, which is about events, which is about people going out on a weekly basis to enjoy themselves, and it's not that you can't through the other stuff as well, but a lot of those productions will be seasonal as well, or would happen every so often. Whereas we know that our industry is something that can work on a weekly basis, and it's something as well that can bring in other artists and people from other from other areas. I think performance art in music and in electronic music is something that can really be it can
developed.
It can be developed, in a far greater way, actually. And I think it's something we possibly did do a little bit more in the past, but kind of disappeared over time as electronic music became more focused on one DJ, on the stage, looking down on everybody else. I mean, I think there's an opportunity for all of these areas and many communities and organizations to kind of converge from both music and into the arts, and actually come together in spaces and actually be part of a bigger community, and I think that's the way to go. But I don't, in terms of spaces, we will have to loosen the restrictions for community, the co-ops to come in and actually run their. See, what's kind of happening now as well is that the councils they're on occasion, not very often, they're giving the green light to certain buildings or developments that will incorporate the arts or maybe some bit of music in it. But it'll be right next to like to where there's loads of residents, or there'll be a hotel next to it, or or this new thing like co-living space now, which is another quite negative developments, which I hope isn't going to take off in Dublin or Ireland or anywhere for that matter. I know it does work in some countries, but it's not what Irish people are looking for now at all. But I think we need to get real with the kind of spaces that will be useful to the whole community, and then place them accordingly in appropriate places. Don't just try and do them in the centre of town and then have to scale back on it by not having late night events. I mean, if you're going to be a multi-use space of note and something that can really bring a lot of people in and get a lot of people behind, it needs to be somewhere that isn't going to create sound issues with neighbours, or else if there is going to be a bit of that there has to be ample investment in soundproofing and that. So I mean, these are the conversations that are still quite hard to have with people from the council or government or politicians, and that's because a lot of them view nightlife and late night entertainment purely with enjoyment and not anything after that. They don't accept that this could be people's careers, or that, and that's a problem. And because the industry has become a lot smaller here as well, we're in a kind of a vicious circle here now, and that there's maybe not as many people within the industry itself who are able to speak out and say that. It's kind of but let's see. We'll see where it goes. It's work in progress. We'll see what happens in the next programme for government. We've been speaking to the main parties, and they haven't quite got there in terms of what the programme for government will be that involves our stuff. But we're going to know pretty soon. So fingers crossed.
So great to know. And so essentially, to make sure it's clear for the audience. So Give Us the Night is your, in a way, team and campaign to lobby or better discuss with the government about initiatives that can help the nightlife.
Yeah, we need legal recognition. We need to foster a new approach towards the nighttime economy and helping people that want to work within it and creative people that want to work in it. And how it can actually help our towns and cities as destinations, both for Irish people and for people visiting here as well. I mean, at the moment, the nighttime economy, certainly in places like Dublin, has been heavily focused on tourists coming over, and it sometimes overlooks the people that aren't going into town because there's nothing on in town for them to go to. So it's fine when you get a lot of American tourists coming over to want to look at the Book of Kells or see where Handel's Messiah was first performed, or go on one of those Viking rides on a bus shouting at people. You might know of this thing, but anyway, there's different things that tourists do when they come over to Dublin, and and it's we're all like, be Gara, be Jesus, we're Irish, and all of this kind of thing. We do well off of that, but now that there's a threat to that, to tourists coming over and enjoying that sort of stereotypical Irish experience and drinking their pint of Guinness. Now that that's been threatened, I think we'll have no choice but to look outside of the box. And it seems funny to think of supporting local creative communities and local venues as thinking outside of the box, but that's sort of where we're at. So let's see. I think everyone would like that and would aspire to that anyway. But the market did go very much and listen, don't get me wrong. I think it's great that we have that level of tourism, and I hope it can grow again to the levels that it has been at. But I know that a lot of Irish people do feel left out of nightlife, and that it's very bland. And a lot of people visiting here also feel it's very bland, or else don't come here at all because there's not like that much exciting going on at night, or if there is, everywhere shut at 2 or 3 a.m. So let's see. There's the desire here. There's a lot of people that want to do things, and we just need to be allowed to do it now and to get on with it.
So, sounds great. And where can people find more? Shall we link them?
Yeah, I mean, it's all like Give Us the Night. So it's you'll find us on, I know, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I don't think we've used any other. It's literally just Give Us the Night. So it's / Give Us the Night on any of those platforms. Probably the one we use. we haven't actually been doing too much on social media stuff over this so far, but we've kind of been working a little bit in the background. And yeah, there'll be a little bit more activity now in the coming couple of weeks now, as we start to put out what is be our action plan that we believe the coalition partners need to undertake. I mean, we've already shared it with the two main parties, but we want to, I guess we want to let everybody and the general public and the industry at large know where we think this should be going next. I mean, we've been a little bit mindful of, I didn't want to jump straight into it with all of what we think and all the rest. I mean, there's a lot of other considerations that are bigger than this now, which is saving people's lives.
Of course.
And that's, you know, I don't want to be coming in with what to a lot of people will be something quite trivial. But at the same time, when the dust settles on all of this and when things have to start back up again, there are going to be a lot of businesses, a lot of venues that won't be able to open. And if they can, they're going to need conditions that will actually allow for them to stay profitable and not have to shut within a few months. Because that's the other thing too. Some people might open after this. This is in any country. They might open again and be closed again a few weeks later or a couple of months later. If people don't come through those doors, that's it. It's curtains, you know. It's already going to be curtains for some places. Yeah. But it's going to be curtains very quickly as well, unless there's sufficient rescue packages in place, loosening of licensing, whatever it is, according to that district or region or country. You know, governments and councils need to come together with venues and help them at this time, or we're not going to have any. You know, so so it's quite important to us, especially as we're about to form a new government. That we're in the plans for this next 4 to 5 years. Otherwise, it's another uphill battle. And I mean, I know I'd like to be as passionate as I am about this campaign and changing this. There are some times where I'd like to be just making beats. You know what I mean? Or
yes, of course.
Thinking about music, you know, rather than you know, preaching to everyone about licensing and what we think and all. I mean, that can. I don't know. I don't want that to be. I don't want that to be to be taking up my mind space for the rest of my life. I think we want to get moving soon and get on with it and improve things here.
Yeah, you know, fingers crossed, and looking forward to seeing what happens. And
cheers.
Thank you for doing that. And yes, and going to the wrap up.
Cheers, Joseph. Yeah, that was a bit of a marathon there. It's the competitive side of me. I wanted to smash all the records. What was the longest one so far, actually, in this?
I think you are the longest one.
Okay, well that's good.
Smashed it.
I'm glad I'm the champ.
You're the longest one. Yes, we can say that. You can add it to your. It's true. This is the longest one, and man, this has been a great thing. And if there was, this is more like a funny question that I'm testing with the guest is if you could pick any other artist on the planet and you could ask them one question, what would that be?
Oh God. Let me think. Can we narrow it down maybe down to decade or down to music style, or because I mean there could be lots of ones.
Yeah. So the last someone who is active now, let's say.
Oh God. Oh, that's a tough one. I mean, I haven't been sure on words so far in this. God. If I could ask them just one question, that's it.
Yeah. Anyone who might have inspired you over the years that you find like an interesting person, doesn't have to be like the most important person you have come across, but like someone who inspired you and you would like to ask them one question.
Well, I suppose let's focus on a DJ or producer, because I mean, I could be thinking longer about maybe other people outside of music, but somebody from DJ. I could ask a load of people why they stopped playing records and then continue to release them on their own labels, and then gave out about vinyl sales dropping. I could ask that to a lot of people, actually, but no, we won't go down that road. Let's see. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, God, I don't know, because I think because I think there's nothing that I'm overly curious about from some of the. I mean, you'd nearly kind of like to ask certain people that are dead now, questions as well, and what they think about, because they're the kind of questions you never maybe would have got to ask them, or won't have the opportunity to ask. I mean,
it's fine the way. I mean, like, if we can make it the way, like, to hypothetical, or let's say person. Yeah.
I don't know. I think what I'd probably more like to ask would be, some of the greats of let's say some of the greats of electronic music. I'd more want to ask them what their inspiration was, actually. I mean, if I think if we're to just focus on a particular time, let's say like the rave scene, I think there's a lot of very important people obviously from places like, if we're just talking from techno onwards, from within the States, from in the UK. I mean, I'd be kind of interested in a lot of. I think a lot of the Detroit heads, their stories are very well documented. I'm also, I guess, I'd be quite kind of interested in a lot of the early warp type of producers, like be it the LFOs, the Mark Bells, and people like that. Maybe what it was that triggered a lot of their inspiration, if it actually came from certain acts, or if it just came from a kind of a feeling. Because I feel that in greatness, a lot of the time, it doesn't always come from referencing older acts. There's a little bit of that, but I mean, obviously, if you go into Aphex and stuff, I mean, you can see that a lot of his influences run back to people like Philip Glass or Mr. Fingers or whoever, and he's been quite open about that over the years. But I think in the early days he mightn't necessarily have admitted that. But I still wonder how much. I think he's someone that still gets very, probably takes in a lot of influences now still. But there's a few of those sort of producers of that era who never really did many interviews either, and who didn't really give a full, which is good. I kind of like that you just don't know much about them. So I've never really had a burning question for anyone, but I do think one of the greats of electronic music in the modern era was Mark Bell, and I think I met him a couple of times. Really nice guy, and quite chatty actually. Although he's quiet when you meet him. First, he enjoys a conversation. But I remember the first time I met him, there maybe were probably things like that I would have liked to sort of ask him about, but I didn't want to be sort of like a fanboy, kind of, wrecking his head. But I do think there's a lot of interesting stories still to be told by many, many producers within our own scene of now, who just haven't been asked the questions yet, and who have kind of fallen out of favor, or who just aren't the kind of people that are naturally, interviewed or hyped up or whatever. And I think there's an awful lot of information and interviews and inspiring stories still to be told, particularly from some of the older members, let's say within the electronic music community. And it's not all about it was better back then and all the rest, but it's about it's about just hearing about the time and the place, and kind of putting yourself in their mind for a moment, and just and maybe even being inspired by some of that. I also feel there's a lot of people within, if we're just talking about techno again, who have been airbrushed out of techno. I mean, people like Christian Vogel, huge example. I mean, one of the innovators of in the latter part of the 90s, and he gets next to no press or attention or gigs or anything, and I think that's a real shame. And I'm just hoping that more of those people can tell their stories, not only of the past but of what they're doing now, and that we start to support not just the upcoming and the new, but also the people that have fell out of favor, who could still be hugely beneficial from an inspiration point of view, but also from a creative point of view. And it's time that we sort of democratize the whole scene in a greater way of involving more people and play more to our strengths going forward, and not just favor a smaller group or pool of DJs and producers, when a lot of the true talents are kind of lying in the long grass, waiting to be asked or waiting to be, I don't know,
to be allowed to speak or
into action again. I mean, there's so many great inspirational stories that people could learn a lot from now, you know, going forward. And I think that's why we need a lot more voices, you know, and people that can just sort of sculpt the scene going forward. It's something that I think the scene can be quite. We suffer sometimes in this scene from whether it's meant or not. And I think it's got a little bit worse with the advent of social media and filming and all the rest, that we can be a little bit ageist, actually, towards older people in the scene. Once they get towards a certain age or a certain vintage, for want of a better term, it's kind of like they're not as relevant, or they don't look like somebody that's going to fit on the front of a fashion magazine or something. I think that's a shame. And a lot of it's all about kind of age. And I think, but I think a lot of the real, you know, some of the best practitioners of electronic music, with knowledge on electronic music and events and creating a vibe both locally and through their labels and all the rest. A lot of these are people that are around for quite some time. And I actually wish the direction of publications, especially some of the bigger ones, would change an awful lot. You shouldn't, if you're a DJ or a producer and you're being interviewed nowadays, it's mostly because you've got a new something out, a new album out, or a new record out, or whatever. But I see so few interviews these days. First of all, in general, or number two, where the person has anything interesting to say, or number three, where the person is actually, you know, even a fraction of some of the people I was talking about previous to this, you know, in terms of their contribution to electronic music and their vision. And I feel that we need a lot more voices, not just, and it's not to say that some of those people aren't going to develop and shouldn't have a voice, but I feel that there are some voices who you're not hearing from at all. And who gives a fuck if they have a new album out or not, or if they're with someone's PR company or whatever? Who gives a fuck? Right? I can think of loads of people who I'd like to hear from right now who should be doing features. And it shouldn't be all necessarily just based on looking back in time and nostalgia and all the rest. Yes, there can be a little bit of that too. But I'm sick and tired of this crap where somebody can only have a voice when they have an album out or whatever. I know it's always been that way to some degree, or to a large extent. It's about a new single, new thing. But now it's quite tough to start with, to have releases out on the right label, or someone that's doing PR and all that. And I think, as a matter of practice, a lot of publications need to go out of their way and need to make a part of what they do that they interview and speak to people that have developed and built our scene and hear what they have to say on the same level as other people as well. Odds are a lot of them are doing stuff now as well, you know. But let's hear Let's hear from them a little bit more. And also, finally on that too, let's hear from people who are prominent in the scene who don't have an album out as well. Because there's plenty of people in the scene who should be going on record and telling people what they think of things now. And maybe that might help move our scene in a better direction. I mean, it's like there's a lot of people who are, let's say, on the kind of gravy train, for want of a better term, who don't want to rock the boat, who are probably being advised, sure, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you talk to whatever publication or whatever, on whatever platform, and tell people what you think of the current situation? Someone like Dave Clark, I mean, he does it here and there. I saw he was talking in the thing. Okay, some of it he's not saying all good things about the scene nowadays, but that opens up the conversation. That makes people think, oh, well, Dave Clark's been around for 3 decades. He kind of knows what he's talking about. He's seen the ups and downs. He's seen stuff like this before, and this is what he thinks right now. You don't have to agree with all of it, but it creates a conversation. And if so and so if such and such DJ is saying this, then other people start talking about it. And I believe that more people need to start talking. Obviously, music is our first language to a large extent. So obviously, you know, the better music that comes out, the better DJing that happens. That's what it's all about. But I do think we need more of the leading voices in this scene to actually talk and share their views and opinions and their ideas. Definitely.
In a way, it's sort of similar to what we were saying before about giving space to less known artists or less, let's say, trendy now artists. Like, there is a contribution that a lot of, or let's say, it's almost like there's a pot of gold behind a lot of these people that people are not just looking at because they are not in the spotlight. But as you're saying, like, there is so much like a person can contribute to you by speaking and telling you stories from their inspiration, from what they think about the industry, from what they've seen in the industry, that is so valuable. I think it's a beautiful thing to actually find ways to help these people convey the message. And I think it's a great suggestion. Yeah,
I think so, and I think there's a way of doing it as well without turning it into a really negative thing either. I think when a lot of interviews as well are done online, depending what slant the journalist wants to go with, or maybe what move. I mean, I think this format that we're doing this in now is pretty good. I've always liked the spoken way of doing things, but I think in general, I mean, it can do no harm to hear from more DJs, and it doesn't have to be just older people either. It can be people that are involved right now as well. There are also a lot of younger DJs and artists who feel like that possibly that they're not being welcomed or weren't welcomed into the scene by older people involved as well, and their journey was made a little bit more difficult as a result. But I think I guess what I'm trying to get at here a bit as well, I know we keep wrapping up here, but that there is for our scene to actually be strengthened moving forward, we need more. It needs to be a wider demographic. It can't just be 18, 19, 20-year-olds going out and then them getting bored of that. And then some people then who've had their few kids and whatever starting to go out again when they're in their 30s or 40s. There needs to be this needs to be welcoming to everybody, you know, and it can't be just where some people are keeping it all for themselves and they don't want to allow the younger people in, or then the younger people feel that older people don't look, you know, right. So, like, I mean, I know a few people. I know one guy, he actually put up a tweet about it last year where he was going to events and people were coming up to him thinking he was a detective and asking him, like, telling him he was a cop. And he was like, what are you talking about, you know? And I know another guy who this has happened with as well, where he gets accused of being a cop when he goes out just because he's, you know, in his late 30s or something like this, you know? Actually, one of the other guys will be in his 40s. But, I mean, but where I saw it really come together in a positive way was at somewhere like House of God over in Birmingham. And there you have everybody. I mean, you have people turning up with their grown-up kids. So their kids could be 19 or 20. And like, I mean, I met up with Neil. Surreal is his artist name. And he was, I don't know if he was playing there the last time I was there. I think he was playing, actually. And I remember meeting him at the end of the night. And he had just recently got married. And I mean, Neil is probably nearly 50 or something now. He was there with his grown-up stepson, who was probably about 20 or something like this. And they were both at the event. They both enjoyed it the same way. Meanwhile, I think earlier that night, or possibly another time I played at House of God as well, there were the lights would come on and there was literally people in their 60s that were there, you know.
That's amazing.
It's brilliant, and I love that. And that's one thing I've always wanted and enjoyed about certain events that I've played at in the past, especially here in Dublin, is that, and it was really nice to see, like, with someone like House of God that's built a community over the years, that a lot of the original people that went to it still go to it. And I think that's the sign of success as a night and as a community, that the people are still going out. I mean, it doesn't have to, years on, it doesn't have to be just, this isn't confined to just one age group. It should be for all age groups. And I think that's something moving forward that I'd like to see more here, and that I've always enjoyed about events here in the past, is that the best nights tended to be the ones that had all age groups there. So sometimes the older people dancing they don't. A lot of them don't care. Like they just dance. They just throw shapes in whatever way they see fit. You know what I mean? Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
They don't. They just dance the way they don't care. They don't care if they're not used to cameras being filming in the thing or any of that. They're just dancing. They're just being themselves, and they're actually dancing and moving their whole bodies. I'm not saying that 18 or 19-year-olds don't, but I would say that some of the older crowds are maybe a little bit more expressive. From what I see in the DJ booth and from what I see in general or from what I've experienced, dancing used to be a little bit more expressive on the dance floor. But the thing is if there are people a bit older or who are throwing more shapes on the dance floor, that rubs off on the younger crowd a little bit more as well. And I found that it can actually have a really positive effect. And then on the other hand, I feel the natural energy that a lot of younger crowds have can kind of rub off on the older crowds as well. So it's I think it works. I just think it works on very, very positively for all age groups to come together. And also it's good for the promoter and for the venue because it's
a wider audience. Yeah.
They're going to have more people in there as well.
Yeah.
You know, so I don't think it should be just confined to one narrow age group, which I fear the festival market has kind of been creating a little bit, and then you're having that kind of sort of becoming the club scene then as well. I think the festival scene is being played out and being relived in clubs now. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's a little bit strange actually. So I think I think clubs should be for everyone. Festivals are for everyone and should be for everyone. But I find a lot of the time now it's very much a certain age group and not as much of a mix as there could be sometimes.
It's tricky, but I think the argument you make, I think, is very interesting, and I think it's useful to, we get down to what music is and clubs are places and things made for people to enjoy themselves and also feel united. And I think there's no reason why we should not be more welcoming to different demographics and I don't know, different backgrounds, different ideas. I think that's the beautiful thing. Absolutely. I always find techno to be a beautiful thing for that reason, because it was it provided the context for people to be together.
Where was this? Sorry.
No, I'm thinking about techno in general. Techno was very, very in a way welcoming to anyone essentially. So I think it's
definitely, that's one of the things that I always found about it. That's why when I find people kind of making quite uncomplimentary judgments of techno and the scene and the people, I mean, what people need to just recognize and know about techno is it's always attracted kind of people that will be a little bit snobbier about their viewpoints and about a little bit uppity about things that are maybe a little bit up their own ass, especially online. I mean, that goes with the territory. I mean, if you can just move beyond that a little bit. I mean, when you go out to a club night or go out to a techno night or whatever, there is a marked difference between going to that versus, you know, something that's a little bit more commercial and less fashion focused or whatever. So, I mean, you just have to remember that kind of stuff. And just, like you said, it's one of the things that is it's one of the things that I always found very welcoming about techno, that it didn't, it wasn't all about, you know, it was more music focused. But dare I say, it's started to go a little bit of another direction now to some degree. I mean, and I or roots to some degree, and maybe not all be shitting on techno every 5 minutes the way a lot of people do. I mean, techno is a large genre. There's lots of different people involved in it. There's lots of different factions within techno. There's a lot of people within the scene who are doing great things. In fact, I'd say it would outnumber the amount of people that are doing stuff that isn't so hot. Maybe some of the people who have been, you know, going down a road that's maybe more image focused and all of that, maybe whether through choice or whether through the markets, they might, you know, be humbled a little bit over the next couple of years, and maybe things will naturally just go a bit more underground. Maybe it's just wishful thinking as well, but I think techno in general, there's a lot of knowledge within techno, and I think that's another That's another aspect of different ages coming together. And I think the online community, though, as much as I find social media can be a downside, it can also be a very positive as well. I mean, I always had a dream of a situation like the last month. Not that we would have a pandemic where people were dying, but I did think to myself, wouldn't it be great to just have a time out where everyone went away for 3 or 6 months, let's say even just the summer, right? And where nobody compared notes online. You weren't listening to other people's music. There was no gigs. So you weren't influenced by anything other than yourself and what you had at home or whatever it might be. And then you come back with all your tracks in September, and then everyone compares notes. Then people start playing what they play in the clubs. And then all of a sudden it's like, it's sort of new again. It's fresh again. It's like, whoa. And something like that is going to happen. But a big part of that, or that fantasy in my head, because I never thought that would happen, but the big part of the fantasy in my head was that you would definitely have no social media. That wouldn't exist. But now I'm thinking, imagine if you had no social media in the last month, people would be going absolutely insane. Yeah. So I think it's been really, really beneficial. I mean, social media, or at least interaction, like the way we're doing now, or just in general, even some of the live streams, I guess, as well. But this type of communication that we can and interaction that we can create through the internet has been invaluable, I think, in recent weeks. So actually, looking what way it panned out, I think it's and funny enough, I think a lot of DJs and producers now, and I know I've been feeling it a little bit too, is haven't necessarily been feeling that they're most productive during this time either. So it's kind of weird how it's worked out, but it's but yeah, it'd be interesting coming out the other side, I think.
It is indeed, and I'm in a way I'm very curious to see what happens after. But I think I like you, like I think there is a good side of social media. The only fact that you and I are in this conversation and we're gonna share this on social media and on streaming platforms, it's a beautiful thing for me that makes it worth it.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's I think it's good. Yeah, because it's kind of, as well. I know you're doing this series already, but I think it's forced a lot of other people to think about their content and what they can create within the restrictions that we have now. And I mean, I'm seeing lots of people putting up various type of content from tuition to quizzes to chatting to whatever it is, and showing other, that they have other strings to their bow other than maybe just DJing, So it's good to see that, and hopefully, I mean, I'm sure some of the bigger publications and brands and that mightn't be overly happy that a little bit has been made a little bit more independence now, from a streaming point of view. I think we were talking about earlier. I mean, I think a lot of people now have learned in the last few weeks how to just do this themselves. So it'd be interesting to see where that goes. But it just might create a little bit more equality in the scene now, where people don't have to rely on bigger brands and maybe can rely on their own brands, for want of a better term, So. Yeah. It's
a big reset, and really seriously, I think the best thing we can do is to looking forward to the good developments. So, Sunny, this has been an absolute pleasure. I love the time with you.
Yeah, likewise, man. I enjoyed this. Yeah, it's been a marathon chat, actually. So, yeah.
In a marathon chat, but like it didn't feel so. Like I think time flies when you're having a nice conversation. So.
Yeah. Likewise. Thanks, Joseph. I appreciate it. It's good to talk.